course, if you've been reading a newspaper for as long as I have, you sort of know that there's a bottom part of the page. But we also want to think about why we need a very long page and whether we can give people good hints that stuff is down there.
It is the 17th of April. Today's Ask Simpraxis has a full cohort of the Simpraxians. We are talking about page layouts today. Building a great homepage is our subtitle. We're going to go through rules of thumb, some planning and usability, page governance, task-based design and navigation, and favorite web parts. And this is really going to be for our newer members to really shine here today. Mark Anderson, you're going to lead us off with rules of thumb.
I never get accused of being new anymore.
No, you don't.
No.
We love you anyway.
So just some things you always want to be thinking about when you're building pages. We'll hit on these same points and in other slides, but one of the main things is consistency. Whatever you're doing when you're building home pages, be consistent. Whether you're building an intranet or a bunch of team sites or whatever, make it so that when people land on that home page, they have some clue about what they're going to do. It shouldn't be like MySpace. It shouldn't be everyone for their own. It should be very consistent. Most important content in your top left, the way people's eyes move across things on the web means that that's your primary spot. So don't put really important stuff down at the bottom of a page that you've got to scroll to. Speaking of scrolling, consider the fold. The fold is an old newspaper. We think about it from a newspaper perspective. The stuff that's on the bottom half of the page usually sticks up a little bit above the fold, so you know that there's a reason to look like this. Of course, if you've been reading a newspaper for as long as I have, you sort of know that there's a bottom part of the page. But we also want to think about why we need a very long page and whether we can give people good hints that stuff is down there below the fold on a home page. Use color and imagery. Visual cues are a very powerful thing that we often don't even pay attention to. We see things out of the corner of our eye and we say, oh, this is that page with the yellow stuff on it. We don't really think it out loud, but that's sort of how our brains work. So, there's a square on the right. I know I'm in the right place, or there's a yellow thing. So make sure that you use color and imagery in those ways. But really, when it comes right down to it, everything is about content. Start with your content, come up with the best way to represent that content, and you will end up with good pages. So
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. I think that Carrie now, making her debut, no pressure.
Oh boy.
Talk to us about outcome goals, because I know you do talk about this a lot. So user stories and outcomes, how do they work together?
Sure. And just to further to what Mark said, it is really about the content. And so planning for that and planning with your users to understand what that content is going to be super important. So user stories are a tool that we often use to sort of elicit that information, right? We give them a table and, a bunch of questions to basically just sort of ask, what is it that you really need to do when you get, to your homepage? It's really like the short, clear description of the process or the task or the information that the stakeholders that are coming here need to either do or find. And what's nice about it is it's tailored to sort of their perspective, right? So you want to sort of do this with different groups to understand their different needs. So a lot of times we will jump to, at least for me, it's hard sometimes not to jump to building the page. Just, they might need news or they might need events, or you have some preconceived notions of what, a homepage should be. But really, this planning stage is important because we don't always have that right. And I think the user stories from their perspective really kind of helps with that. This slide talks about it being the sort of true north, and it helps us sort of, build our site and sort of prioritize the content that's on the page and in the navigation. So it is really super helpful. And, we know that the most successful intranets do help people get their jobs done. So this stage of really understanding what those jobs are is not only helpful to just building the page, but also understanding later if you've met those outcome goals, like have we checked all the boxes? Did we improve upon things that we needed to do? So it's super important, and one I tend to want to rush sometimes because again, we think we kind of know what people need, but it is a good step to take a pause and actually ask those questions through user stories.
This is so true even for developers too, right? We often will be sitting with our clients and we know we're doing an extensibility, and it's often, if you kind of have done these things before, you just want to like jump to the technical solution of the thing, and you really got to hold the reins really tight and hold yourself back and make sure you're
Right.
listening to everything that they're sharing with you, so that you can make sure that you're not trying to pre-describe, apply technical solutions to something until you fully have a complete vision or view of the architecture of the solution. And then you can start applying the technical things to each one of those items to actually manifest what you need to build. And so here's an example of a user story.
Yeah, so this, that's like a typical table, that we sometimes use to sort of talk through all those things that I was just talking about. And it's really just understanding what each of those different scenarios might be for people in your organization that have tasks or information that they're trying to find. And what's nice about this, and it's sometimes hard to actually get folks to do this, right? And so what's nice about it is you really are getting specific and detailed about what are the actual things you need to do. And it does definitely help just to make sure that we're building things the right way. So this is an example for HR, which is like a typical example that we would use. And you can see, asking what those audiences are, what the roles are, who are the people coming to your site, and what do they need to do, and why is it important? And that's kind of the big part, is like the so I can. It's really like, what is the reason for this, and are we actually making a difference in improving these processes and making sure that things are in the right places? So in this example, for HR, as a manager, they may want to understand the review process and the proper way to go about it and the timing that's required for it, so that they can provide that valuable feedback to their staff. And so it's nice to be able to do this, but if you can't actually get them to sort of fill these things out and really think about it at that level, the next slide is just sort of general questions about what are people coming to your site for? Like, who are your visitors? What's that audience that's coming here, and what do they need to do? Sometimes just prompting them with, is it policies that people need to read? Is there something safety related? Do you need to report an issue or get support on something? That might be something we prioritize a little higher on the page or in the navigation. So it's asking these kind of questions that really kind of help drive the build and the design, and also just to make it functional and intuitive. So things like the technology that they're using, maybe for finance, they're using ADP, or for HR Workday or something like that. Those are maybe things we want to include on the page as additional, applications and tools for them to get their job done. So
one of the things sorry to interrupt you, but one of the things I really like about the user stories is it's a way to sort of get people to flip their thinking around. And you and I have been working together on some stuff recently, Carrie, where, this is what we need to tell everybody. Well, that's important. But what is it that they need to hear from you, and why, and what are those outcomes? And that's what these user stories do, is they flip it around like that. So at least the intent is to try to put the people publishing the content in the shoes of the people who are consuming it.
For sure. And, like that next bullet about, promoting content, it is a two-way sort of exchange. It's your opportunity to share things going on in the company. Maybe it's employee recognition or, news and events. So it's your opportunity to promote things the other direction too. And that's sometimes what I think people do forget about, is that it's a good place to be able to do that. And sometimes it's just solving not so much problems, but enhancing the current way people are doing things, whether they're sending an email or a newsletter. Having that conversation about what they want to promote out is important, because now there are new, better ways that are more in people's face, that they're actually getting information in a lot of different ways with a new homepage or a new intranet. So it is a good conversation to have. And yeah, I mean, just champions, who are the people that are going to be excited about the new solution or the new homepage or the new site? Who are those folks? And, you know, can you get them to help sort of, you know, help with the transition, I guess, you know, are they the ones that can sort of bolster a little bit of enthusiasm around what you're trying to do? It's always helpful to have those folks in your corner. So yeah.
Cool. All right, so we have, Mark, a typical intranet homepage image here, and this is a beautiful one. So
it is beautiful, isn't it? This is in
yeah.
this is one that we have in our SIMP design tenant. We have a tenant just for this stuff, where we sort of prototype things and take people through, you know, art of the possible kind of conversations. So, you know, these are some of the components that we tend to have. And, you know, preconceived notions, sure, Carrie just warned us about those, but we do see some consistencies across intranets, for example, across landing pages, home site landing pages. And so we often end up with very similar components, though there's a lot of mix and match here. So if this is the landing page for an intranet, you notice that we have hub site nav across the top that's persistent across all of the sites or content that we might visit in that tenant. We've got some site navigation, things that are within this particular site that we might use. We've become very big proponents of using news. News is something that I thought was sort of dumb when it first came out, to be honest, you know, because it was more focused, a lot of the rhetoric was around team sites. But when it comes to communication sites and being able to bubble up news from other sites into one central place, it means you have a good information churn, right? You've got enough freshness there that people will want to come here often. Same thing with events. This events web part is very boring because there are no actual events in there. That's just what it looks like when you add it to the page without any. But the idea would be is if your company has events that you want to share, they also bubble up from other departments. On the right side, we've got the quick launch web part, which is where we tend to put in that section, we tend to put things like, you know, what are the top 5 things that people come to your intranet for? The most important stuff, the stuff that's going to, you know, give them a one-click access to a very specific thing that they need to do on a regular basis. And then there's on the further down, there's a my recent sites. It says that's the personal feed. It's called my feed, that shows you sort of your stuff. Sometimes we use that, sometimes we don't, because a lot of that is actually over in the app bar as well. So these are some of the pieces that we tend to have on the homepage of an intranet.
Casper has a question mark.
Yeah, sure.
That seems relevant to this
for
page.
Mark, or just a question mark?
Just a question, but Mark, I think it's a good place to pause. So he's saying one page for all people or massive targeting, and I think he's asking what am I talking about?
Don't know.
Audience targeting.
Audience targeting.
Thank you. That was the word. Good job, everyone.
Yeah, audience targeting is awesome if you can sort of lay it over the top of this. So it can be true that we end up with too many things on the page, some of which are not relevant to us. So for example, under region maps, which has some buttons that don't really talk about regions, but if I'm a member of, if I'm in a particular region and I don't care about the other regions, you could audience target those quick links so that I only see the one that's relevant to me. Same thing with some of the navigation links at the top. The trick with audience targeting is you've got to have good data, which is always a struggle. You know, who are the supervisors? Who's in a region? All of that stuff has to be consistent and maintained in Entra ID or Active Directory on-prem, or else that just doesn't hold up very well. So we'll often start with no audience targeting and then sort of layer it in as we can beef up that data.
And I think it makes more and more sense the larger the organization, because
Right.
when you're a really small organization, it's probably not even necessary. But once you get much larger, and you have a lot of things in the navigation or a lot of stuff on the homepage, being able to audience target really helps keep the overwhelming nature of all of this content a little bit more accessible. So I think it is make it more relevant, even though that's less consistent, because it's more targeted to the people who need it. But I completely agree with Mark that you have to be cautious about it. Absolutely, same for news. Wireframes.
Yeah, so one of the things on our agenda was also wireframes. So what I just was talking about was an actual example of a homepage for an intranet. This is where we'll actually start to, sometimes we'll, instead of starting with an actual page, we'll sort of wireframe something out like this in PowerPoint first. And yes, we do use PowerPoint for this, nothing fancy, just boxes. And here we can just move around the various sections that we might add to pages to try to reach some sort of consensus of generally how we want department homepages to go. Now, the page before was the home site homepage, the intranet homepage. So there's only one of them. So we can sort of move that one around and work it out as we're going. When we come to departments, we want consistency. I mentioned consistency up front. So it's nice to sort of wireframe it out and see how we're going to want it to work. This varies quite a bit from intranet to intranet or different usages. Something like a call to action is something that you typically will use from time to time. So it might be something that you add when, like, open enrollment for HR, and then you take it away when that's done. So nothing fancy, but this is a good way without getting too invested in the, what color should something be and what kind of images are we going to use, just to think about how to lay out the page.
And a news page wireframe?
Yeah, and we're actually talking more about home pages, but the same idea sort of applies to news pages. Do you want to have, for example, different flavors of news? You want people to follow a certain structure when they're posting a certain kind of news, like, for example, a new employee announcement. They all should look the same with the person's picture on the right, for example. So you can sort of use this wireframing thing to come up with different ways to treat things like news if it's helpful. There's something to be said for simplicity. In the days when we all worked in a building together, lots of times what we would do is walk into a room and do this on a whiteboard or with yellow stickies on the wall or something. Nowadays, we're typically doing it in a wireframe kind of example.
All right, so let's move on to usability. Patrick?
Yeah, so just starting with a good definition here, usability is the quality attribute that assesses how easy user interfaces are to use. The word usability also refers to methods for improving ease of use during the design process. I think Carrie and Mark have hit on some of these through their conversations. So I think, the key is it starts with the user. Who is using the site? Why are they coming there? Getting to the heart of those things Carrie was talking about with the user stories, and trying to figure out what information people need from your site, both from people coming, but also what information you want to give out there to them. Another thing that we can do besides the user stories is actually take it a step further and do some formal user testing, whether that's formal focus groups, meeting with different people across the organization and asking them a set of questions of that need to know data that your organization has and seeing if they can find it. Are they just using the search bar at the top because the navigation needs some work? Are they going to a specific site to find a certain policy, but it doesn't live there? Things like that can really help us drive for better design when it comes to it.
Cool. And then, so page governance.
So page governance is, I think Mark just hit on a lot of this as well. It starts with the content and who the owners are. Knowing the overall content can impact the site. Figuring out what those top 5 items are and how to, keep those up to date using the analytics that you can get in modern SharePoint. What is relevant today may not be 3 months from now. So it's a good opportunity to get advantage of those analytics we now have to kind of see and swap out some of those top 5 items. Thinking about the layout on the page, what's that important information is at the top. You might drill down a little bit to have different sections or different team information further down on the page, thinking of it like an inverted pyramid in a sense. As you go down, it's kind of more focused, but people can find it. Consistency, I think that is the key that we've all been talking about. If users know that you've got news in the front and center and these top 5 hits on every site, they know where to look immediately for that information. It also helps build trust that the information that is out there is the most current. It is the strongest trust in the truth of the content and the accuracy of what is being put out there.
Yeah, and this goes to why you need a steering committee, which is another session that we talked about before, but you can't do this page governance well if you don't have that steering committee, that group that's sort of like, hey, every 3 months we're going to come together and talk about these things that we're highlighting here. That becomes really important to have that group that's in charge of that and is that doing that task to keep your intranet fresh and alive, because we know that if you sort of let it die on the vine, it's going to get so out of date that all the effort you put in front to build this great intranet and hiring a consultant like us or whatever to help you do it then is wasted money because you've sort of lost the benefit of the platform.
And sometimes too, Julie, it helps when you may have some site owners or, the people that are responsible for sort of setting up their department's site. They sometimes have some opinions on the way they want to do things, and they always think they're really unique. So having that governance is a good way to sort of balance that. And to what Patrick was saying about user testing, having people actually try to find things, it's like, it's unbiased, right? It's not that I don't like the way you want to design this, it's that the actual testing results are that we can actually find your stuff pretty easily. So I think that's helpful to have that committee or that governance to sort of back you in some of those decisions.
That's a really, really good point as well. Okay, task-based design and navigation. I think this is maybe a style of building navigation.
It can be, yes. So, I mean, certainly Mark and Carrie hit on some of this a little bit too. It's thinking about who, again, the users, who's coming to your site, what content do you have, who will be updating it, and what's that most important information that users need. Finding that information and talking to both the site owners and the people coming to your site help us develop where to put things on the page, as well as how to maybe reorganize your navigation into a way that makes more sense for people. Task-based design, it's the reason people are coming to your site. It's arranging the content so users can find it. I know that can sometimes be difficult because site owners love the way their site looks. They're thinking about what they want to present, not necessarily what the users need to find. So certainly asking site owners those questions, it's like, well, this is great, this is beautiful, it's good information, but what does your user find? What are those top 5 questions that you get on a daily or weekly basis? And how can we present those on your site in a way that people are going to your site to find that answer, which frankly frees up your time for those more complicated tasks that you might have.
Yeah.
So it is always good to point out both sides of it and say, we're trying to make this easier for you as well.
It's always amazing to me when we're working with somebody and they say, oh, the most important thing in this site is this document. And let me show you where it is. You click on this and then you go into this folder and then you scroll down to the bottom and there's a link there and then it takes you into another site and that's where it is. And it's like, oh my God, how does anyone find that? Put a link on your homepage, right? I mean, it seems like such a no-brainer, but it happens a lot.
Oh, so good points. Here's a nice visual, right, of task-based navigation. Anything else you want to add, Patrick? Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, so I mean, this is like a travel site, similar to what Mark was showing. You've got the news, which is constantly updating to keep people interested. We've got some features, which are kind of like the key things people might be interested in, last minute deals. Everyone wants a deal while traveling. But then I also did a little exploit here of the navigation and how we can take that task-based information we've gathered and build it out in a way that makes sense for the users. So here we have travel locations. Well, what are the different types? You've got cities, you've got mountains, you've got sea, you've got different types of travel, which is just a different way of presenting the information from a user's
Volcanoes.
point of view. Yeah.
Volcanoes.
Yeah,
Oh,
I
it's
might
awesome.
be pushing that a little bit, but just to show that, we can take that information, rebrand it in a different way. It's still there. It's just in a way that people might search or look for it. That's
Nice. So we have some favorite web parts.
Yeah. I threw out some of
It's a
mine.
secret, though.
I said quick links. I think they're very adaptable. They're easy to add content to. You've got lots of different layout options. It's a quick way to add if you use graph, you can use an image. There's lots of quick ways to do that. I actually like to use the graph as well because particularly if it's going to a page with an image on it, it matches. So you have that continuity there. So people have that tie-in. Call to action is another one of my favorites, particularly to add an eye-catching image or just a question saying, you're looking for this document, check out the knowledge base. And it just sends people to that way. It also works great for, as Mark was saying, if you have something like open enrollment that happens, once or twice a year, I guess once a year. You can put that on a homepage and it catches people's attention because it's not always there.
I put a couple of these on here. The people web part is an underrated web part. You can add people to it. For example, in a department site, you'll often have a page or a section of the homepage that will list out, who's responsible for what in a particular department. And by using the people web part, you can hover over that person, find out their email address, their phone number. You can chat to them. You can see them in the org chart. It's just it expands to such a wide amount of data. It's awesome. And then the other thing on the right side is actually not a web part, but using sections. A lot of times people don't think about using multiple sections in a page. Each section can have a different background, for example. You can do what sometimes is called zebra striping. So, this one's white, this one's gray, this one's white, this one's gray, which helps to break up the sections of the content. And then the other part of that's nice is that you can clone entire sections or copy, reproduce, whatever, that two little boxes thing. So you get a section set up the way you like it, you can reproduce it, and then just start to build a page that's got similar sections all the way down. So that button is really, really helpful, not just to reproduce or copy web parts, but also sections. So think about how you can use sections to break up a page and make logical content representations that will help people consume that page.
There's a good collapsible section chat going on in the chat about collapsible sections and when not to use them. That's good content for those who are in the chat. For resources, we have the SharePoint Lookbook, the maturity model for Microsoft 365, which we didn't talk a lot about today. We often do, but we didn't. But I think it does have some bearing on some of the maturity of, when you use these templates and how robust they are. Certainly audience targeting is something you could talk about from a maturity model perspective. Usability 101 link, and then creating and using modern pages in SharePoint site. That's a support article. Next time, May 1st, the age of Copilot and AI. I will not be here for this one, so we'll see how that one goes.
We'll use your opinion a bunch, though.
Oh,
yeah.
Good. Oh, good.
The Mark, Todd, and Patrick Mark, Todd, and Patrick show.
Exactly. So see us live. Microsoft 365 Community Conference, which we just discussed, that is happening in April, and Derek and Carrie and I will be there. Technorama, that is Todd. He will be out in Antwerp, Belgium. The European Collaboration Summit, that is Derek and I attending that one. And then TechCon 365 in Seattle in June, that is just Derek. So definitely say hi to us if you're going to be at any of those events. And if you want to go to those events, we've got discount codes for you all over the place. And with that, and 1 minute over, unfortunately, but we try our best. Thank you, everybody, and see you next time for Ask
everybody.
Praxis.
Thank you so much for joining us this week on Ask Praxis. We love getting your questions or session ideas. You can submit by using the link in About. If you find this helpful, hit that like or subscribe button and share this content with your colleagues.